I want to experiment with something with you guys. Is that okay? Can we do that? Can we experiment with something? Now, I want you to think about this for a second. I love stories. And right now, me and the boys are reading the Chronicles of Narnia. Well, me and Abe. Jude usually says, "This is boring, I want to go do something else." And then he runs off and does something else. But me and Abe are into it. We've read 4 of them already. And right now we are very slowly working our way through The Horse and His Boy. We love stories, we love shows, we love movies because they bring us into this world that is being created by the author. Stories make us feel something. Stories make us think about things. Stories make us wonder how we fit in to the stories. Do you know what I mean? The other cool thing about stories is sometimes there's different ways to think about them. Like sometimes the way that you hear a story is different than the way somebody else might hear a story. And today I want to play around a little bit with some of the stories that Jesus told. Now Jesus, he was a smart guy, and he loved to make people think, and he loved to make people enter into these worlds that he would create for them when he told them a parable. A parable is like this, it's this made up story. The fancy word for that is fictional. It's a fictional story that Jesus creates to make people think about what the world is really like. If you care, in Greek, this word is parabole. Fun to say, isn't it? These are the parables, and they make people think, they make people feel. Well, there's this one time in Luke chapter 15, where all the tax collectors and sinners, these are the people that aren't really part of the cool kids group. They're off doing their own thing, and some people don't like them very much. But Jesus hung out with them all the time. The Pharisees and the scribes, these are like the religious people, the pastors and the leaders of the time, if you will. They saw who Jesus was hanging out with, and they said, "Oof, this fellow welcomes sinners and he eats with them, and that's not what we do." And Jesus, when he hears this and when he sees that these people are kind of upset about it, he tells them not 1, not 2, but 3 stories. And I want to experiment with maybe a different way of reading these stories in this video. So all 3 of these stories, they have a similar theme. They all have to do with numbers, and they all have to do with counting. So in the first story, there's a shepherd, and the shepherd has 100 sheep. He doesn't have 90, he doesn't have 92, he has 100 sheep. And every night he brings them together and he counts them to make sure that he has how many? 100 sheep. Well, one night he does this, and he starts counting, he looks around, and he only gets to 99. 1 is missing. So he brings them all in again and he starts counting again. And I don't know how he counted them, because 100 sheep, that's a lot of sheep, that'd be hard to count. But he's counting all over and he gets to 99 again. And he says, well, this isn't good. There's 1 that's missing, and without this 1, this group is not complete. So I need to go find it. So he leaves the 99, and a lot of times people would think that he's just kind of leaving them rogue, but in this moment, there's probably another shepherd there, somebody to take care of the 99. So they're cool, okay? The 99, they're cool. So he goes off and he starts looking for this sheep, and he's sort of expecting it to be hurt or to be lost, maybe to be killed by another wild animal or something, but he finds the sheep. And the sheep's tired and it's ready to go back home. So the shepherd picks it up and puts it on his shoulders and he takes it home. And when he gets back, he's super pumped because he has 100 sheep again. All of them are there and they are all accounted for. Not one of them is missing. The group is complete. And then there's a story about a woman who has 10 coins. These are Greek drachmas, is what the coin is called. And they're not worth a whole lot, but she's got 10 of them, and they're really important to her. And one day she realizes that one of them is missing. And if you're missing 1 out of your 10, then you don't have 10, which means your group is not complete. It's not whole. Every coin matters. So you have to make sure you have all of them. So one is lost, and she goes on this tirade trying to find the one lost coin. And she's sweeping the room, and she's looking under the table, and she's all over the place until she finally finds it. And then she can rejoice, and she's super pumped because now she doesn't have 9 coins, she has 10. The group is complete. They're all there. And then Jesus tells another story. A story of a dad with 2 kids. And the younger of the 2 kids comes to him and says, "Hey Dad, can I have my inheritance?" Which basically means, "Hey Dad, when you die, you're gonna give me half of the things that you have, and I'd like to cash in. I'd like them now." So Dad, despite his sort of feeling of like, oh, that's kind of hurtful, decides to give the inheritance to his younger son. And immediately the son leaves, and he squanders the money, and he's just all over the place, and he doesn't have anything, and there's a famine in the land, which means there's no food. So he has to work for this person feeding pigs, which is a weird thing to do. And one day he's in the mud, and he thinks, the pigs have it better than I do. Maybe I can just go home and be a servant for my dad. So the kid goes home, and the dad sees him in the distance. And the dad says, "That's my youngest boy, I just know it." And he runs out to him. And this time it's kind of funny because he like hikes up his long cloak, and he's running down the driveway, and he gets him and he bear hugs him, and he puts a new cloak on him and a ring, and he's like, "You're here, you're here, you're here. We missed you so much." And the younger son, who thought that he was gonna have to be a servant in his dad's house, was just accepted. And Dad was like, "Bring me the fatted calf, we're having a feast because our youngest son is home and we gotta celebrate." Now, who's missing from this story? Remember, Dad has 2 kids, and all we're really seeing is the dad and the younger kid. So all the guests start arriving for this big party, and they're celebrating, and everything is cool, except Dad realizes that the older son is not here. And the older son realizes that a party is going on, and he has no idea what's happening. And he says to someone like, what is this? "Oh, haven't you heard? Your brother's back, and we're here to celebrate." And finally, the older son confronts the dad and says, "I've been here all the time, and you've never once celebrated me. What gives?" And the dad says, "Your brother has come home, and we must celebrate." Now, we usually stop the story there, but I think it's important for us to notice that it's open-ended. And the real issue is not celebrating the son, but maybe the real issue is whether or not the older brother is going to join. Because when a shepherd has 100 sheep and one goes off, the group is not complete. And when a woman has 10 coins and she loses one, the group is not complete. And when a dad has 2 sons and he's celebrating one and the other is not there, the group is not complete. Now, this story is really cool because it's bringing us in, not into 1 or to 2, but to all 3. And it's asking the question, who have we forgotten? It's asking the question, who have we taken for granted? Who are we not celebrating? I think that this story is really neat because it helps us to love our neighbor well. If we're thinking about the group not being complete without the one who is lost, or the one who is missing, or the one who has been pushed out of our group, and we're always going to be looking to make sure that they're included again. Because when the group is complete, that is worth celebrating. But when one goes missing, we need to go and find them and bring them back so that we're all together again. Now guys, this is a neat set of stories, and I think that it's gonna be applicable for you when you think about your friends and how you treat them or how others treat them, when you think about your family and making sure that everyone is there. When you start thinking about numbers and you start thinking about counting, you're gonna want to make sure that everyone is here, because without them, it's not complete. Now, parents, I wanted to jump on here and talk you through what just happened, because that's probably not the way that you've heard that story told. And actually, if you read through Luke, the interpretation that's offered there at the end of each of these stories is about rejoicing because there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons or over 9 coins or what have you. So, a lot of times in the Christian tradition, we have used these 3 stories as evangelistic stories, meaning we've got 99, and when one is lost, God goes to find the one. This interpretation that I've offered in the kid video prior to is from this book. It's called Who Counts, and it's written by Amy Jill Levine and Sandy Eisenberg Sasso. Amy Jill Levine is actually a Jewish New Testament professor, sorry, blank there for a second, a Jewish New Testament professor at Vanderbilt. So she's coming to the story not from a Christian perspective, but from a critical perspective of a first century audience and what they would have been hearing here. And for them, you know, it's difficult to think that the shepherd or the woman or the dad would have symbolized God, because God doesn't lose people. And what they would have heard instead is what Jesus is doing in these set of stories is he's including the sinners and the tax collectors and bringing them in, because without them, the group is not complete, right? So he's making sure that everyone is brought into the family. Now, I think we can also look at this from the standpoint of how we play the role of the shepherd and the woman and the dad, and making sure that we too are looking externally to see who is not in the group and bringing them in. So in a sense, it is evangelistic, meaning that we're going after people who might not feel as though they're part of the in group. But I think that this nuance is a bit different. I certainly think that in Luke, we need to link these stories together, because you have a story about 100 things and one is lost, a story of 10 things and one is lost, and then a story of 2 things, and they take turns being lost, right? So the younger son is lost for a bit and then he comes home, but at the end, it's the older son who's lost. And there is no conclusion. It leaves it open-ended, and you're left wondering, will the older son join the party and make the group complete? And I think that there's a lot of things that we can think about there. Now, of course, I don't mean to diminish or minimize this concept of repentance and forgiveness, because it's in the text, right? It's in Luke's telling. But also, I think there's something to this piece of inclusion and the group not being whole without the one sheep, or without the one coin, or without the one son. And I also think there's something to us wondering who plays the role here of the shepherd and the woman and the dad, because God doesn't lose God's people, but we do all the time. We overemphasize one group to the detriment of another group. I hope that is ringing bells for you right now. We oftentimes privilege the in-group and are less concerned about the one who has wandered away. And what the story is here moving us towards is fight for inclusion and fight for completeness and fight for wholeness, because that's what Jesus does and that's what we're called to do as well. So I hope that at least gives you food for thinking and conversations with your kids. You can certainly add different layers to this. There's also a version of this story in Matthew 18 that has a different focus altogether. The story is not framed by Jesus eating with sinners and tax collectors. The story is actually framed with this idea of kids and the people that are brought into the family of God having the mindset of a child. So it's a different thing that Matthew's going after there, but I would encourage you to look at that and begin to have good, fruitful conversations with your kids about caring for people well and about fighting for inclusion as Jesus does.